Hey guys, as you can tell, not Brother Jim this morning. I know what you're thinking. If he was going to bring a guest in, why not Rachel? She's just better. But you're stuck with me, and we're on Facebook. How fun is that? You guys can leave some comments. I'll totally read them later. We are at the end of this journey, spiritual intensive, that we've been on for almost 40 days. Tomorrow is day 36. And I just want to encourage you guys to press on the journey. If you've only done like 15% of it so far, you're probably not alone, and that's totally fine. Reject any shame that you're feeling over not doing it perfectly. Like, this was created by the CBC staff, not by God, and they're just trying to help you. So if you haven't done it perfectly, that's okay. None of your shortcomings are written into Monday yet. Tomorrow's a new day, so let's tackle it this week. And this week is going to be a good one because it's all about sharing the tales of our spiritual journey with God. So tomorrow what you're going to do is wake up and read Psalm 78, which is this soaring poem rehearsing everything that God had done from Moses all the way until David. And then that psalm of remembrance is going to propel you to think about some highlights from your journey with God and share those with somebody else. So that sounds like a good way to start off Monday, start off the week. This is going to be a good week. You might be wondering, how am I really going to share? How am I going to do everything that the guide says to do this week, given the coronavirus situation? One of the days does suggest trying to do an event. Maybe you're not able to throw in a party with your friends this week. But I think that could actually be a good thing. Right now, when it comes to evangelism, to sharing, we are sort of working inside of the box. Right? We've got limitations on what we can do. We can't do the huge event. We can't do the block party. It might be a little bit offensive to go around knocking on doors, passing out brochures. People might feel like we're putting their lives in danger to proselytize or something. But what I want to talk with you about a little bit this morning is how I think this could actually be the best thing that's ever happened for your evangelistic efforts. Because if you're like me, normally evangelism is just one of those Bible things that we know we're supposed to do, but we just don't really do. And so I want to read a little bit of Matthew 7 before we go any further. It says this: "Enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow is the road that leads to life, and only a few find it." This is Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, and a little bit later he says, "Not everyone who says to me on that day, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, 'Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons, and perform many miracles?' Then I will tell them plainly, 'I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers.'" This is that stuff that we know is in the Bible, and honestly, we don't really like reading it. We don't really like talking about it. We would rather our small group study something that Paul said in Philippians, or something Jesus said earlier in the Sermon on the Mount that sounds a little bit happier. The idea of Judgment Day really weighs on us, and for good reason. We kind of like to avoid it. It's kind of the elephant in the room oftentimes. And so when we get to these passages, we're like, okay, here comes the big talk, right, about how I'm supposed to be sharing, and here comes the big evangelism talk. And every time those come around, and every time the sermon is on sharing, for a lot of us, it doesn't make us share anymore. It's like we've got this backpack, actually, and maybe a big one, kind of like this guy, and every time we hear the evangelism talk, we just stuff a little bit more shame and pressure and anxiety in there, and we just keep carrying it. But the only thing that we hate more than the evangelism shame is the idea of actually doing evangelism. So we just keep carrying it and not sharing, and every sermon, and we're just struggling when it comes to evangelism. We're ashamed, we're embarrassed, we're sad. We just kind of want to wait until the next Sunday until we talk about something else that we feel like we can kind of accomplish, and then we'll all just kind of rally back together and get back on track. And if that's how you feel, I'm with you, because I've tried like handing out tracts and brochures and knocking on doors. One time I was in Michigan. I don't even know why I went to Michigan to share the gospel with people, but we were walking through the suburbs of Michigan with clipboards, and we were knocking on doors, basically trying to trick people into talking about God. And so we were acting like we were doing this survey, and we really weren't doing a survey or turning in any survey results. But the idea was to get them to think we were doing a survey, to kind of trick them into answering some questions. So, hey, we're just doing a neutral, casual survey. I'm just this random guy. And have you ever heard of sin? What about Jesus? What about hell? Right? And we're pretending to write stuff down, and we're actually just scribbling on a piece of paper. I remember trying some weird segues. Am I the only one who has tried like memorizing weird conversational segues to get from like everyday cafeteria conversation about the release date of the PlayStation 5 to the Roman road? Or you show up at a Halloween party and you try to grab conversation by the horns and just awkwardly steer it towards the 4 spiritual laws or something. You're holding your punch and somebody's like, man, how's the punch? And you're like, it's not very good. You know what? That reminds me of another person who had to drink a cup that wasn't very good. Jesus drinking the cup of wrath. And let's talk about, that's a good way to never get invited to another party ever again, right? But for some reason, this is the stuff that we think of when we hear evangelism. And if that's your jam, don't let me knock you off track this morning. Like, just keep doing that, right? If that's your jam, there's nothing wrong with it. God can use anything. I'll say the same thing that Paul said in Philippians. I don't care how people are sharing the gospel. I don't even care what their motives are. If they're sharing the gospel, I'm cool with that. But what I'm concerned with is you normal people who are like me at least, who just hate doing that. And so what you do is you never share the gospel. And it's primarily because it's so awkward. I think some of you might know what I'm talking about. And this morning, I just want to give you some practical tips that have been helpful to me as a guy who doesn't like to ruffle feathers, who is probably more introverted than extroverted. And my idea, the banner over the next few minutes, is just, what if there's a way to approach sharing that could actually be enjoyable, that actually might lead to more friends regardless of response, and that didn't leave you in knots saying awkward things? What if that was possible? What if there's something we can do to like evangelism? So the title of today's talk is Sharing Jesus Without Freaking Out. And if I could give the subtitle, Evangelism, the Way You Were Born to Do It. And it's going to be pretty short, but I think you might be interested. Are you interested? Awesome. So I've tried something, and it's a revolutionary idea. It's called conversation. And so I've got 3 suggestions for you this morning. It's right under our nose. It's really simple, but I think just being really practical this morning could free some of you guys to actually try this. So my first suggestion, I'm going to put an image up here on the screen for you, is make friends with people who hate God. That's more fun than it sounds. Like, we've had a year of a lot of racial unrest, right? And I've heard it said that our neighborhoods are really segregated, and our schools are really segregated, and our churches are really segregated, but the most segregated place in the world turns out to be your dinner table. A lot of times we just don't have people in our lives, in our homes, who are different from us, whether it be racially or culturally or spiritually, who knows. Different age demographic, different political party. We just tend to associate with people who are like us. And so step one to evangelism, the way I think you were born to do it, make friends with people who hate God. Like if you're the person who hears the evangelism talk, and then they say, write down 3 names of people you could share with, and you're like, I don't know 3 atheists. I don't know people who aren't Christians. Your first step would be just to make more friends, right? So we can kind of get locked in to a corny Christian subculture, and we can lock ourselves in an echo chamber where the only conversations we have are just echoes of our own ideas resounding back to us. And so here I have a t-shirt that says Noah, I'm flooding it. And you guys might own some t-shirts like this that are like the corny Christian, dare I say, Lifeway stuff. And that's just not the best way to move towards evangelistic relationships and conversations. You might have to get out of your bubble, talk with people who don't like God, who you're going to have to start in Genesis with. You're not going to be able to start with John 3:16 because they don't even know what you're talking about. That would be my first recommendation. And it's more fun than it sounds. This means learning stuff, like what's going on in the world, like cultural things that are happening in music or television, so you can have conversations with a wider variety of people. It means being fun, right? Just getting out and meeting people, doing stuff, having hobbies, reading books, and again, using your dinner table to have people over. This is a great first step. It's a lot of fun. Second suggestion is to put stuff on the calendar. Put it on the calendar. And by the calendar, I mean their calendar. Sometimes we put it on our calendar. I'm going to try to share more this month. But then we're sitting there in knots by the water cooler at work thinking, I've got to try to insert that gospel thread in this conversation. But that's just not where the conversation is at. And I've had some good, like, spur-of-the-moment Jesus conversations in other countries, but almost never in the United States. And that's not because I'm scared here and I'm bold there, but there's 500 years of cultural history that makes it okay to talk about metaphysics in Malaysia. And here, it's just not what we do. And there's a long historical narrative behind that reality. And what we have to do if we want to talk metaphysics is not try to insert a zinger in the middle of physics class, but we got to put Metaphysical Club, talk about the meaning of life night on our calendar and their calendar. And the crazy thing that I have discovered is that if instead of trying to kind of manipulate somebody into talking about Jesus, like, hey, you're a sinner. If you put it on their calendar, if you ask, hey, do you want to go get ribs and just talk about the meaning of life? People say yes. They really do. So I think this is better than this like self-torture segue, trying to create something out of nothing deal, and it creates a lot of good conversation. So maybe put away the corny Christian t-shirt. Christian has never been a good adjective, more of a noun for me. And maybe drink more coffee or tea. Ask somebody if they want to go chat about the meaning of life. And then guess what will happen? You'll be there, and the expectation will be you're talking about the meaning of life. Some of you might think Brother Jim is really good at sharing the gospel. He cheats. Because when he's talking about the gospel, it's in a setting where that is the expectation. And so sure, it doesn't feel awkward, and the lost person feels like it's normal and they're not offended and they don't feel like it's a personal attack. They were in a setting, a context where it was expected. Create a context like that. That is, in my mind, like a cheat code to get these conversations moving. Okay, third suggestion is actually you might not need to do a ton of planning. Like when you meet, what am I going to talk about? What am I going to say? What are we going to study? You actually don't have to teach. You don't have to make a huge elaborate plan. Like, get questions on the table. And yeah, you might realize how little you know, but you just being authentic and just talking about the origin of life, the point of life, is a breakthrough already. The person across the table is going to appreciate your realness more than your like Bible know-it-all posture. And if you're like me, what might happen is you might actually kind of get to know the real Jesus a lot more than you did before. Because what I was doing is I was kind of studying the Bible only in contexts in which it was assumed that this was the Word of God. And so the Bible was kind of treated as a set of golden tablets that had fallen from heaven and was perfect and needed to be put into practice right away. But when you get across that coffee table with somebody who doesn't like God, then they're not viewing the Bible like that, and you start to have to really grapple with what's in there. And they'll start pointing out some things that it's like, that is a weird verse. And I don't know why God did that. And I've got here a picture of Jesus. It's not really Jesus. We don't have a photograph of Jesus. But about 20 years ago, BBC did this documentary, and they used a real first century skull from the kind of Nazareth area where Jesus grew up. And they used a bunch of technology I don't understand to try to recreate the closest guess that they could get to what Jesus actually looked like. And this is it. And you'll meet this guy right here when studying with non-Christians, and it might just blow your mind, and you might just realize that the Bible is 10 times as cool as you thought it was, because it's not just a list of Instagrammable proverb-esque wisdom, but it's like this whole story with all these different genres, and they're all hyperlinked to each other, and it's crazy and literary and stylized and beautiful and mind-blowing and worth a long walk and a lot of meditation, like a lifetime of meditation. And I started meeting this guy in the pages of Scripture while reading the Bible with people who don't like God. And I started seeing things that I couldn't see when Jesus was depicted in his kind of painting version where his hair is flowing and he's got the little bright halo above his head. So I think that's been really cool. I view the church differently, the Bible differently, God differently, heaven differently, hell differently than I did before I started studying the Bible with lost people. This journey has brought a lot of self-awareness and a lot of anxiety, honestly, but it was also epic. And it wasn't miserable. It was exhilarating. It was fun along the way. And at times it was actually, can I say, effective? Like, I can't tell you how different the knocks were, the apartment door knocks were, from me passing out the brochures. You know, knock, knock, knock. You've never seen me before. You don't know me. Here's a brochure about how you're a sinner and you're headed to Dante's Inferno, and call me if you have questions. Versus me being in my apartment complex, and the guy above me and the guy beside me, I asked both of them at different times if they wanted to just go out to eat and talk about the meaning of life. They both said yes and were excited about it. Even though, I'm their religious nut friend, still it's like, I've got a friend. So they were into it. And later, they're the ones knocking on my door. And the one above me would wash his laundry in my clothes washer. The one beside me, when he went through a breakup, I was the person he called, and he wanted to go on a walk with me. And at the end, this sarcastic, cynical, atheistic, naturalistic guy is hugging me and tearing up because we know each other and we've talked about the most important questions of existence and the difficulty of being and ancient Hebrew scrolls together and what our goals are in life. And so I think it's worth getting creative, trying new approaches to doing this. If you haven't been sharing the gospel, try a different approach, right? Don't just keep beating your head against the wall, adding to that backpack of shame. Try something that works for you, and it might just be revolutionary. This is sharing Jesus without freaking out. Normally, when we turn to Matthew 7 and we read this, we just want to run and hide. But what if we get coffee and we're sitting across from somebody with an open Bible between the two of us? That turns out to be gold standard evangelism. Missionaries, this is what they actually do with people overseas. I know quite a few missionaries and have been overseas for a couple months. This is the way they actually go about it. They don't go knock on doors doing cold calls. They meet people and then try to meet with them again and try to get an ongoing, like, weekly kind of book club going where we're, like, reading Matthew or something. It's brilliant. I don't know why we don't do it more. Maybe it's because we see Jesus having these, like, 3-sentence standoffs with people, and so we think, okay, I've got to do what the Bible says, so that's what evangelism is. But we're not Jesus, and this is a different time, and God is really okay with you being creative, especially if it's in order to fulfill the Great Commission. That's about all I've got to say. So I hope that helps you. Let me know how it goes.